statement. That is the meeting Dr. Matjila testified about EDCON. I have checked the facts with the Office of the Minister, Minister Patel. His special advisor, Mr. Kathrada, supplied me with the information. He was also present at the meeting. And the facts are the following, and it's been discussed with my learned friend and Dr. Matjila, they agree, that the meeting was arranged by the chairperson of the PIC, the Deputy Minister, Mr. Bagungubelo. It started at 8 in the morning at PIC. It was the first formal meeting where a Minister of State and the chairperson of the PIC were present. And as I've stated, Mr. Kathrada, the special advisor to the Minister, was also present. Thank you, Chair.
That's confirmed, isn't it?
Good morning, Mr. Commissioner. Yes, that's indeed confirmed, Mr. Commissioner. May I also say, in connection with the Nexus forensic report that I had referred to earlier in these proceedings as perhaps containing untested and unproved allegations against Dr. Matjila, we've been provided with a copy of that report by my learned friend, and we've had an opportunity of studying it, and we reject the allegations contained therein on the basis that they are flimsy evidence, if it indeed can be called that, and Dr. Matjila maintains his position that he did not receive any loan of the sort referred to in that report.
Thank you.
Commissioner?
You are still under oath?
Yes, Commissioner.
Yes. But I just want to ask Advocate Leber, are we going to get some evidence on that? Are you going to lead evidence on this report? Because I'm not sure where it comes in at the moment.
We are still considering whether it's necessary to put that before the Commission, as I think I share the view of my learned friend that the evidence value of that will still have to be considered. Thank you.
Thank you. Where are we, Dr. Matjila?
Commissioner, we are now on paragraph 336, response to the Commission of Inquiry terms of reference. Page 119, Commissioner.
Before we start, I just want to follow up one or two questions from the past few days. Dr. Matjila, given that you said that you have come under pressure from politicians, business people, political parties and all that, what would you advise the incoming CEO or the next one, what to do when they face that kind of pressure? What would they have to do things differently?
That is if you have a view.
Commissioner, maybe it will be appropriate if we leave it under recommendations, if we can. I think I will deal with it partly there. Of course, taking into consideration some of the learnings from this commission, some suggestions that were put forward by the commissioners themselves, which I found can also assist. But perhaps we can have that under.
Yeah, I thought so. Perhaps. Yeah. Okay. No, it's fine. It's fine. Let's deal with it then. Yeah. We mustn't forget it. Okay.
I don't think we'll forget it. So, yeah. Can I proceed, Commissioner?
All right. Yes. Yeah, we can start.
Yeah. Commissioner, if I may, I think so far I have given the Commission who I am. We covered quite a bit of discussion around that, and we gave PIC in context how we work and the achievements of the corporation performance, and we've dealt with attempts to try and remove me from my position, and of course my ultimate removal. And now we want to touch on specific response to the terms of reference of this inquiry. 336, Commissioner. Before I do so, I would like to put on record that I have prepared my response on the basis that, in my view, the core issues concerning the PIC center on governance and the constant conflict between financial issues and political motivations.
Functional issues.
Yes, functional issues. Thank you, Commissioner. With funds exceeding 2 trillion rand, the PIC is a very tempting piggy bank for many. Despite the controversies and the narrative in the public domain, and before this commission, the PIC was in good shape when I left.
Sorry, can I just ask you to elaborate on that? Because I think the question for me is that's a very wide statement. If you look at the issues that have come up, and in relation to your first point, the conflicts between functional issues and political motivations, that certainly runs through all of the evidence that has come through. But also what has come through very sharply is governance and abuse, victimization, issues that affect people functioning in the PIC. I think it's, given everything that has come before us.
Give me a moment, please. Somebody is on the phone. Somebody is on the phone inside the hall here. Please.
I would ask the question differently. If you say it's in good shape, are you referring to its financial performance vis-a-vis the benchmark, or are you talking about the organization? Because the question of performance is, I think, has been well reflected, but the shape of the organization, the dysfunctional board, a board that resigns, the disputes between members of the boards, yourself, staff, allegations against staff, the extent to which you have either had disciplinary hearings or dismissals of a huge number of senior executives, we're not talking about low in the organization, calls into question that it was in good shape as an organization. So I'd like you to perhaps just elaborate whether you're referring to the financial performance, which is one type of good shape, and that I'm not saying it is or isn't, I'm saying that that's one element, and the other is the organization as it stands.
Yes.
And how you would see that, because I think that this would, for me, be a questionable statement, given everything that has been here.
Commissioner, I understand where you're coming from, and all I wanted to reflect here is that the PIC, in terms of delivering on its mandate, it has done exceptionally well. Financial performance, it has done very well, beating benchmarks, and so on and so forth. But it's not without problems, as you say, and this commission is here because the commission is trying to get to understand what the problems are and how to deal with them. Thank you, Commissioner. And we say in 338, the PIC continues to outperform its benchmarks and serves the interest of 1.237 million active members of the GPF whose investment it manages, and about 450,000 pensioners and beneficiaries for whom it provides a secure, prosperous and dignified retirement. And of course, we spoke about the spin-off for the economy through developmental investments. If I can go to the terms of reference, 1.1, it says whether any alleged impropriety regarding investment decisions by the PIC in the media reports in 2017 and 2018 contravened any legislation, PIC policy, or contractual obligations and resulted in any undue benefit for any PIC director or employee or any associate or family member of any PIC director or employee at the time. In response, I make the following general observations. 339.1, all transactions performed by the PIC follow the investment process as I have outlined earlier and more fully in the PIC annual reports. In particular, the investment process is clearly explained on page 33 to 35 of the PIC Integrated Annual Report of 2018 and other previous reports as well.
Dr. Matjila, if I can just stop you there. When you say that all transactions follow the investment process, are you suggesting that there's never any deviation?
There will be a deviation in some instances, and of course this will be occasioned by circumstances, and most of those will be administrative in nature as opposed to a deviation from policy.
Thank you.
If I could, because I mean, all organizations face this. It's not particular or peculiar to the PIC. Most organizations, if you looked at the annual reports, if you looked at the process and the form is there. All the requirements, all the things that should be in place are usually in place. So the question for me in relation to this statement is that the form and the requirements in place, yes, but the substance, what actually happens. And there's a difference between a deviation to meet certain objectives and a flouting or an ignoring. And what has come in evidence here is that the form is there, the substance is being questioned, and we're going to come to that in a lot of these particular entities and transactions that we're going to look at, is that the form may have been met, but was the substance, was the intent met of that form? And I just want to put that on record that we would be discussing this question, that I don't think, we may have a different view as to whether that form is effective or not and can be improved. That's a different question, because there's always room for learning and improvement of process. But the question really is, in substance, was there a violation that had material effect on decision making? And I don't think all I'm raising at this point in time is it's not the form that is in question about what was in place. And as I said, it could well be in recommendations, improvements, but the substance of it, and that we're going to come to later. Okay.
Yes, Commissioner.
Thank you.
Yeah, we'll discuss that later.
You want to ask, Judge? Yeah. Oh.
Give me a moment.
Here's a question. The mandate that we spoke about, says you must deliver on a couple of things. Have you delivered on that mandate, saying that the PIC is doing well? Just that part of the client versus the PIC, which is terms of reference 117. So sort of have you fully delivered on that mandate? Is that question clear?
1117.
That's terms of reference 117. It's a new one saying that the PIC needs to deliver on the client mandate.
Okay.
Have you delivered on that mandate as signed between the PIC and the GPF?
Yes. Commissioner, we have delivered on the mandate, and we spoke about the returns if you look at what the mandate requires in terms of rolling, if you really talk about hardcore returns, they've given us a mandate to either track or exceed certain benchmarks on a rolling 36-month window. And we've demonstrated that over the long term, which is 5 years. 5 years is the most important for a long-term investor and a fund of the nature of the GPF, that we have outperformed the benchmarks that the clients have set for us. In addition to that, we've been able to deliver the social returns, and yes, we believe we've done exceptionally well.
And is it true that the mandate is mainly about financial performance? It's not about the operations of the PIC. Is that true?
So far, the mandate is about financial returns, but there is an expectation that the PIC has the necessary platform. Everything is in place from people to systems in compliance with the Fires Act, because the regulation is very clear what the PIC has got to have at the minimum to be able to discharge its responsibility as a financial services provider. If those things are not there, the regulator will have to step in and ensure that either the PIC comply or the license is revoked if there is total non-compliance. And as I said earlier, Commissioner, if I may, the FSCA did a review on the PIC before I left, and that review didn't raise any negative findings on the operations of the PIC in terms of compliance with the Fires Act or with the license of the PIC.
So in terms of the terms of reference 117, you are saying there are two things. So it's the financial performance, and then it's sort of the compliance in terms of the Fires Act, which is the systems and the processes and all that. And you are saying that those two were met. Are you saying that?
Yes, those two were met.
Yeah.
And as I said, there is a letter that certifies that we have met the requirements of our license, in addition to returns that we have delivered for our clients.
Okay, and then any other issues are to do now with the board and the management of the PIC? It's got nothing to do with the client. Is that what you're saying?
It has something to do with the client, because the regulator will always be aware of any issues that are putting the funds of the clients at risk, including media reports, the board being dysfunctional, and many other issues that have engulfed, the challenge that have engulfed the PIC, will be of concern to the regulator and the clients, of course. Yesterday I spoke about one client where we had to withdraw the mandate, and we withdrew that mandate because we discovered that they are about to breach certain fires regulation or conditions, and therefore withdrawing the mandate and engaging with them is part and parcel of our responsibility as the asset manager overseeing external managers that we have given money to, who are supposed to be authorized financial service providers as well, that they comply with the mandate. The same applies to the PIC as well. If there are concerns, the regulator steps in on behalf of the clients. And the clients as well have got freedom to raise matters with the FSB when they are not comfortable with the client or the service provider.
Is there room for a client to say to the PIC, we understand that you are going to invest in a particular, call it a transaction. We don't like it because of this and that and the next thing. Is there room for a discussion between the two, the PIC and the client?
Commissioner, it depends on the relationship. As it stands right now, PIC has been given a discretionary mandate by the client. It's fully discretionary, but with parameters. Because as I've mentioned yesterday, that in the unlisted space, they wrote to the PIC to say, following the AfriSem issue, I explained yesterday, that above a certain threshold, the PIC must approach them for approval. But in the unlisted space, it was 2 billion, but in the listed space, by the time I left, they had not put any conditions on that. So the PIC will then have freedom as long as the assets that the PIC invest in comply with the climate requirements or climate benchmarks. If it says you shall invest on the Johannesburg Stock Exchange as a proxy for listed investments, the benchmark that you will track is this one. Now, any initial public offering or companies that raise capital on the Johannesburg Stock Exchange are eligible for investment by the PIC, in other words, because then it will comply with the mandate. We don't have to go to the client because the mandate is specific to say you shall invest in listed companies on the JSE. You can invest in companies in Africa. You can invest globally, and these are the parameters within which you can operate, Commissioner.
Yeah, in fact, I think we did discuss that either yesterday or the day before.
Yes, Commissioner.
Just tell me something, in terms of the PMCs, you know, when were they founded, and then was the IC, you know, there for a while, I mean, for a long time? Just tell me when was the IC formed and the PMCs?
Commissioner, I found the ICs at the PIC in 2003 when I joined, so that structure was already there, which of course has to be there because it's an investment house. So there was, if I remember, in 2003, the IC was there, and then the board and other committees, but not the full gambit of committees because the board was very small. The board of commissioners was very small. But post-corporatization, then the PIC started to work towards complying with the King Good Codes of Corporate Governance. And then we have IC dealing with any issues above management in terms of the delegated authority. And then EXCO formed to deal with day-to-day operations with its subcommittees dealing with investments, which is Portfolio Management Committee. So those committees have been there for as long as I was at the PIC. And of course, we have refined them, made them more efficient as we go along, created new ones to augment whatever PIC we had, PMC we had in those days. For example, dealing with PMC properties, dealing with PMC unlisted. All of those PMCs have evolved with the complexity or in response to the complexity of the mandate.
And you got the passive part at the PIC, but you also have the active part called the smart beta part. When was that founded? The 200 billion or so, which is managed internally.
The smart beta, if my memory serves me well, it would have started almost 4 or 5 years ago, if not more. But then we built capacity to really make it an attractive product, focusing on it, putting lots of energies to ensure that it's effective and it's delivering for the client. And if I recall, my colleague, Mr. Mulibatsi, did explain, I think he's the one who actually took it to the next level, you know, yes.
Thanks.
So in short, the internal funds, the large portion of it was tracking the intakes pretty much as far as possible. It's almost difficult to get to zero with a big fund like this. Not with a tracking error, pure passive. It's almost impossible. There will always be a little bit of noise that creates a certain tracking error,
yes,
you know, of less than 0.5. But and then getting the outperformance from the external managers, yes, the managers that are managing 25% yes, of the fund. But then with capacity and the skills that we brought in, we were then able to carve out a significant portion to track an enhanced beta strategy.
Yeah, okay. All right, thanks. Thank you. You can proceed.
Perhaps it's an opportune time, given the discussion that's taking place at the moment, to look at whether there's a differentiation in how you're exceeding the benchmark. Do all your different components, fixed income, local equity, property, impact investment, is there a difference between those entities or those areas in exceeding the benchmark, under succeeding? Is there a difference between that when you say you exceed the benchmark? Are they all performing?
I think they are all performing. They are all contributing, and we also now have a report on unlisted investments to show that they have also outperformed the benchmarks, which is the South African Venture Capital Association benchmark. We can provide that report to the Commission as well. So across all asset classes, we've seen contribution towards performance. And it's very important also to look at it from the portfolio holistic point of view, because market go through cycles. Some sectors like property may be under pressure in a certain cycle, but you have other sectors driving performance and overall lifting the portfolio, and there will be instances where things are reversed. So our job is to make sure that we capture those opportunities to do opposite of the reversals in the market to add value.
Thanks. And the PIC is the largest holder of sovereign bonds and continue to fulfill that role or function. And obviously, given the kind of pressures, there's a good return on those bonds. And also on the Eskom bonds. And I'd like to just ask in relation to that, given that the credit rating downgrades on some of their, for instance, Eskom, has that affected your fixed income portfolio? Are you still buying Eskom bonds at this point in time?
Commissioner, I'm not sure what the PIC is doing at the moment. I'm outside.
No, we're talking
but
at the time when you left.
Yes, at the time. We've supported most of the state-owned entities, and once there were problems starting of the balance sheets and so on, we then put together a much more comprehensive policy on how we're going to finance state-owned entities going forward, and the nature of interventions that we will require to entice the PIC to put more money into state-owned entities, fixed income instruments. And I don't think, if I remember well, we have not increased our exposure or bought more bonds of Eskom, except the 5 billion bridging facility that we had to give them to avoid any potential breach or default on Eskom. We thought it was an important thing to do. So Eskom has not defaulted on the payments. They've always honored their payments. Again, this is another discussion to be had later on. PIC is invested in close to 90 billion or so, if my memory serves me well, and almost 70 billion of those bonds are government guaranteed. And there's a 20 billion that is not government guaranteed, which was done through a private placement. Of course, it has a spread to recognize the fact that there's no government guarantee. And those bonds have done okay, as expected. The downgrading, unfortunately, as a long-term investor and an important player in the economy, we are unable to bail out. Otherwise, we might as well move to another country under those circumstances. So we are tied in. It's part of the economy, and the fact that the portfolio is exposed to the economy, Eskom is an important component of the economy, there's not much we can do when the credit rating falls, except that we need to intervene and put pressure on those who have ability to influence the changes, the necessary governance changes, to do so that and assist in pulling Eskom back to where it should be.
That was my follow-on question, and I'm referring to Eskom, but it may well apply similarly to other state-owned enterprises, but let's stay with Eskom, is given the governance issues at Eskom and the challenges that we face through Eskom in the whole economy, did the PIC in any way, as a major shareholder and a purchaser of their bonds, have discussions with them or with the relevant minister or ministers in relation to energy and state-owned enterprises about governance and about what you as a major shareholder see as issues and things that need to be addressed? Was there engagement with either Eskom or the minister on these matters?
Not directly with the minister, if I recall, but we have done so with management and provided them with the policy and conditions under which we could do further investments. And if I may, Commissioner, with your permission, just to give you a sense of what our thoughts were in trying to fix the balance sheet. We were saying 90 billion of bonds, 70 billion is government guaranteed. What if the PIC is allowed to be active in the governance structure? Can we change the structure of this exposure to give the balance sheet a breathing space and also give government and fiscal position breathing space through letting go the guarantee in exchange of participation in the governance structure and therefore have oversight? That has two benefits if we were to do that. The GPF is government guaranteed already as a fund. If you're holding government bonds on top of that are government guaranteed, or Eskom bonds that are government guaranteed, you have double guarantee from the same guarantor. But the guarantor is struggling with its fiscal position. They can't balance their books because there is this 70 billion that is trapped in the PIC. And we were saying maybe there's something that we should be releasing to give the fiscals more space, but in exchange of a more active role in the governance structure so we can protect the PIC position. We went to an extent of saying, but can we also consider a situation where these bonds are converted into an equity-like instrument? Now, when you do that, you even give the balance sheet of Eskom a bigger room to maneuver. But then it requires even more involvement in the governance structures to protect the interests of the investor. So, Commissioner, those are the ideas that we've put forward. I did speak about my meeting with Minister Gigaba at that time. We did make that policy available to say we can fund and these are the conditions. If we are a debt holder only, I'm sure we can be allowed to sit on a committee like Social and Ethics Committee, or even if the PIC sits in the Social and Ethics Committee, it should be allowed in an observer status in committees that does procurement and so on and so forth. So we really ensure that governance is enhanced and the state-owned entity deliver on their mandate. And it was across the board, even SAA and all the others, Transnet, that needed finance from the PIC.
Have you re-raised that, because you referred to the discussion being at the time of Minister Gigaba, and as we know there's been lots of musical chairs there.
We have
you re-raised that with the present Minister of Finance or the Minister of State-Owned Enterprises?
I think at the time when we were negotiating the 5 billion, we did put this idea on the table with Eskom. With
ESCOM,
at
management level.
At management level, yes,
Okay.
yes, Commissioner.
And perhaps then if one just had to make a comment, it would be very important as to who the PIC put on the governance, given the experiences we've had with directors on boards at the moment. So a critical factor would be that governance has to be from the PIC nominations of who sits on that board very well thought out and reliable.
Absolutely, absolutely. It requires a different
Different
approach to
approach.
it. Yes, yes.
Should that ever materialize, it is something that the person or persons identified to sit on that board would have to be like Caesar's wife, above suspicion or reproach.
You know, I wanted to ask this later, but I mean, since we are here, let me ask this, you know, and I think it's more a GPF question than you, but if you can, please answer. It's a very controversial subject, but I've seen it talked about, so I wanted to check whether you can shed some light there. Some people are saying the GPF is in surplus, the country is struggling. Why can't the government take 300 billion rands from the GPF to have a stimulus and boost the economy in the country, and then when the economy grows, then the government can top up the fund again, you know? Why can't the government take something from the GPF to boost the economy?
I think it can be done a lot better, I believe, you know, within the mandate design. I spoke about the asset and liability process of the GPF. So it can be done as a mandate as opposed to forced or expropriated, because it may not be compensated. Things go wrong. So Commissioner, the liability structure of the GPF, if I remember well, it's almost half, I think. I stand to be corrected, but almost half of the members are going to retire in 15 years, somewhere around there. The other half is going to retire beyond 15 years. So, which means that there's an opportunity to structure a different strategic asset allocation. You could do a strategic asset allocation that deals with the 15 years that's going to retire and try to match them properly, match the assets with liability on this group. And then the one with long-term liabilities, structure a portfolio that's going to generate long-term return in a sustainable way. An infrastructure type of investments, and you can even drive manufacturing, you can even drive those sectors in developmental investments that I spoke about with that portion of the portfolio. And you don't have to do it at once, because you can start slowly by allocating slightly a bigger chunk to unlisted investment, taking this portion. You know, if it's 10% or 15% of the portfolio, it's quite significant. But it's now controlled by the client as opposed to being prescribed by government, as it were. So I would probably approach it that way, to ensure that it's controlled by the client. It's a mandate issue, and it's able to deliver and get monitored by the clients themselves.
So you are saying then that there is a balance sheet here, and the president, if he wants, he can use it, you know, given that the liabilities are long-term, and actually this can boost the economy, the 300 billion or 400 billion rands.
Yes.
Of a stimulus and economic stimulus.
Yeah.
Okay, that's interesting. Yeah.
But being controlled by the client itself, and I don't think it's difficult to do that, because I'm sure even if you give 300 directly to government, you expect it to go into, to be productive, to be put in assets that are going to generate
Infrastructure,
and those
roads,
kind of
ports
things.
and all that. Yeah.
Absolutely,
Yeah, yeah.
absolutely.
Okay, all right, thanks.
Can I just, to wind up on this aspect, I'm looking at paragraph 336, where at the end you say the PIC is a very tempting piggy bank for many. I think there were allegations, I think it was from the AMA GP, where an allegation was made that the PIC has become a piggy bank for politicians. Do you have any comment on that? I know we did talk about politicians approaching you for assistance here and there, but has it become or hasn't it become a piggy bank for politicians?
Commissioner, no, it hasn't. We spoke about the investment process, asset selection, that is very stringent, and we will take any asset onto the books if it meets the minimum requirements. That's the way we deal with the risk of being a piggy bank. Thanks, Commissioner.
India, you can continue.
339.2, Commissioner. While delivering healthy returns on PIC's investment is critical, contributing to the country's broader socio-economic development is also part and parcel of the PIC's mandate and very important for a long-term sustainability of investments. I think by and large this is what we've been discussing as the role that the PIC can play in stimulating the economy. 339.3, through investment made in companies owned by black entrepreneurs, the overarching theme for the PIC's unlisted investment is transformation and inclusive growth. Therefore, the focus in this regard has been to invest in sectors that have the potential to encourage what the country needs more than anything right now: employment and development. Governance regarding risk management within the PIC is a stringent process that complies with Section 17 of the Fires Act. In addition to ensuring that the legislations, laws, regulations, policies, and best practice standards are all met, the Risk and Compliance Division ensure that portfolio managers manage the investment portfolio in line with client mandate. There is a team in the PIC that's dedicated towards monitoring compliance with client mandates. I repeat what I have said above with regard to many reviews and audits performed by various statutory watchdogs on the PIC, all of which resulted in a clean bill of health being given to the PIC whilst I was at the helm. To suggest otherwise is patently unfair.
Can we stay with this a minute? Yesterday you acknowledged, because you're saying here that the risk management you are fine with. And I really do need to, and while you may have the divisions, as I said earlier, you've got compliance in place. If you looked at some of the questions raised earlier, and some that are raised later regarding risk management, how do you deal with cumulative exposure? How do you deal with the question, if you look at risk management as we've seen, and it'll come through in the evidence that we're going to go to transactions.
Yeah.
And if you looked at yourself relating to what you said about the head of risk, Mr. Magula, changing risk positions. And we've seen that in a number of cases, that within a 3-month time, that was the evidence we had yesterday, within a period of 3 months, risks that were high became risks that were medium to enable a transaction to pass through. Is it really the case that you deal with the process of risk as distinct from the effectiveness of risk in the PIC at the moment? This is an area that I personally, from the statements, and we'll go through that, have some concern about the effectiveness and the weight of risk in the decision making. And so this paragraph of yours, if you like, contradicts the evidence that you yourself have presented about risk. Do you think that this is a fair reflection that we comply? You might comply with the Act, which is one element of assessing risk. The other is risk actually taken at the level and as effective and as weighty in our decision making as it should be? Can you talk to that a little bit?
I think, Commissioner, if I may, it's not perfect as we can see. There are areas that needs to be looked at, but it doesn't mean the whole of risk management has collapsed. There are certain sections that requires to be looked at, interventions made, and there are certain sections that we believe have done fairly well. It be market risk area, the compliance function has done exceptionally well. Even in the area of credit, it's not the whole portfolio or all the transactions that were done by risk where we have challenges in terms of the quality of the reports. It's just one or two transactions, in particular the NEF that we spoke about, Makaya, VBS, if I can mention some, where clearly there was very serious issues with the risk management.
Okay, let's come back to it later then, because I think we can use those, because it's a very important question in relation to our terms of reference around the issues here. But they're going to come out in the different entities that we look at. Okay. If you looked at your last sentence, that all of the statutory watchdogs of the PIC, all of which resulted in a clean bill of health, was this before or after the transactions that are under question? When would you have got that clean bill of health? Is it an annual event? Is it a regular assessment of the effectiveness of risk and a clean bill of health being given to the PIC? When would this have been, when was the last clean bill of health, if we put it that way?
I think the reports are very recent, because these exercises were conducted at the time that there was a lot of noise in the media about the PIC. And so we had the FIC, Financial Intelligence Center, as well as the Financial Sector Conduct Authority in the PIC to conduct the assessment. And those reports are very recent. I think we've mentioned them, if I recall. I'm told it's paragraph 186 where we refer to the reports. I think FIC is DD28 and the FSCA is DD27. And of course we have the Auditor General comments in our annual financial statement, unqualified.
Thanks.
They are very recent, August and September 2018.
That's excellent. Thank you.
Thank you.
You're on 3395.
Yes. Conflict of interest checks and declaration are also stringently applied at each meeting, and directors are compelled to file annual declarations as well.
Again, I want to just raise that in terms of form, because yes, that is in place, but if you look at the substance, if you use the example, let's take conflict and where you have felt pressures against you in particular, where investments are being sourced and coming through, particularly you've mentioned Dr. Mkhize, sourcing coming through different channels, but he chairs the investment committee. So again, I want to just ask you in relation to form and substance. The form is there, is the substance there? And how have you related to I mean, because given the difficulties that you've said, I'm using just that one example of deals coming in that you know originate through that, and then you chair the investment committee. You can have all these checks and balances about signing the declaration, but the practice is different. How would you see that difference between the form and the practice? Do you see that in actual fact, while we've signed as members of the board or whoever, declarations, interest checks, etc., in practice, has that been the case in the more recent past or historically?
Commissioner, it's an important question that the Commissioner is asking. It's been a challenge to deal with this aspect of conflict. From management side, the investment process that we've put in place, we believe has been effective in terms of screening investments. Those that have potential, we subjected to rigorous due diligence. And by the time they get to any committee, we present them there because they can be done. We believe in them. Now, what we expect is in those who are presiding over these investments to be honest enough to recuse themselves as per policy and declare and recuse themselves. And this, I believe, was happening within the PIC. Has been the practice at each and every meeting before a transaction or the meeting starts. Those who are participating must declare their interests and conflicts.
I'm assuming that that has a proper written form that is signed, or book that is signed to identify that and can be tracked.
Absolutely. There is a book, and it's not only applying to investment committee or subcommittees of the board, it also happened in EXCO. Everyone that participates must tell us if they have a conflict, and so we can deal with it, and they sign that book.
Have you ever found somebody has signed the book and actually been involved?
I don't remember those situations. Maybe it's because I've never done an in-depth analysis of that. I must be honest. (39.6) Contrary to the erroneous claims made in certain media reports, no single person within the PIC, and especially not me, can possibly make an investment decision on his or her own. All potential investments are carefully scrutinized and analyzed in the PMC processes and discussed and debated by the PMC before a decision to invest is made. And the checks and balances that are enforced to police this are about as robust as they possibly can be. However, at the end of the day...
Sorry, I just want to stay a bit with this paragraph. The first question is this. Roughly, and I've asked it before, roughly what percentage of transactions come through the door, you know? Roughly, and what percentage have come through you or through the board and through others? Because from the transactions that we look at, it appears that the bulk have come through, you know, through you as the CEO. And no one could give me the correct percentages.
Yeah, I think it's going to be very hard to do that because transactions come from all manner of doors, if I can put it that way. Via emails, unsolicited, you will get, you know, an email in the morning to say, I'm requesting funding from the PIC, and then they explain themselves, and then you pass it on to the team. I pass on to the team. The same will happen with the team themselves, you know, so we'll have to literally go through the emails that are dealing with transactions to be able to build up a database and analysis of that. I think the commissioner did ask if we don't have a system, and we said we did try a system that never worked, and now they are in the process. When I left, they were in the process of implementing which I believe is fairly sophisticated system. The same system we've tried before, by the way, but our implementation was unfortunately not up to standard. So we've tried a customized system, it never worked. We tried a system off the shelf, sophisticated system by a vendor, we couldn't implement it properly. Now we are trying it again, they are trying it again. And I think this time they've put together a much better team to implement. I think you probably may have to, Commissioner, the PIC may have to do an exercise to start compiling that data and analyzing.
But then would you say that the bulk of the transactions didn't come through you? I mean, I think one person, I think it could have been Mr. Magula, said the bulk of them came through you.
Well, transactions come from all over. I haven't even had a chance to say, can we compile a list so we can see which ones are from my email, which ones are from someone else's email, so we can reconcile this issue.
The second question, close to that is that it appears that when you bring in a transaction or sort of recommend a transaction or tell them to look at a transaction, it appears that the deal team feels that they get under pressure to execute it, like they say, this is from Dr. Den, and you have to do it. Do you think that's the case? It seems that there's that pressure, about people to execute something if it comes from you.
I don't agree with that, quite frankly, because these are different teams that deal with the same transaction. You have the ESG dealing with their portion, legal dealing with their portion, and the investment team also doing analysis independently. I don't get to influence what they write eventually. The only time I see a transaction, if it comes through the office of the CEO, is that time, and then I pass it on to the executive heads, the responsible executive heads, to see if it fits the mandate. If it does, then they start processing. But if it does, it doesn't mean that it's going to be done, because there's further work that needs to be done to test if really it's going to deliver the returns and many other aspects of it that we would like to see in a transaction in order to do it. So there's a lot of work that goes into a transaction and final approval that I don't get involved in. It's done independent of the office of the CEO. It's done by the team at an arm's length. We do discuss from time to time. If they run into problems, they will consult with me to say, we have this major problem. Is there a way that we can deal with? And I guide on that basis. But in terms of the nitty-gritty of what works and what doesn't work, I don't get involved at all.
So you're saying that there are enough checks and balances along the way with risk and the other departments to ensure that a bad transaction won't go through, even if it's recommended by you?
Absolutely,
is that what you're
absolutely.
saying?
I don't understand where my colleagues were coming from in terms of me putting pressure on them. I was actually quite shocked that people were making statements to say that I'm pressurizing them. I can remember, I think it was Mr. Siani. I don't even get to engage with Mr. Siani because he's got 3 bosses, above him. I interact with Mr. Madavo. Mr. Madavo will interact with Mr. Mulebati. Mr. Mulebati has got Mr. Sunil Vages, who was here, and then Victor Siani as an assistant portfolio manager, as an example. So I'm quite far removed from the actual work that the team does in terms of analysis.
All right. Okay, thanks.
339.8, I think that's where we are. 339.7. However, at the end of the day, the market determines the value of an investment, whether it's good or bad. These originate from various sources and channels, individuals and groups. All these are sent to relevant executive head. I think this is what we've just explained. And the executive heads will then appoint a small team to do a high-level analysis to assess mandate fit. And then meet with the executive head. Then I meet with the executive head to agree on deals that are worth pursuing following his or her recommendation. In fact, we've changed this slightly and set up a deal screening committee to be the committee now that determines whether a deal can be pursued or not pursued. 339.9, in line with the standard operating procedures for listed investment, a copy of which is attached under DD 51, that I have designed to give effect to the delegation of authority. The deals that are presented at PMC 1 for approval to do due diligence DD, or sometime proceed to prepare for PMC 2 if due diligence has been done without incurring any cost, for example. So that is the process that I've put in place in order to give effect to the delegation of authority.
Doctor, if I can just stop you there. The standard operating procedures that you've referred to in this paragraph, is that PIC policy, or what are they?
Standard operating procedures are management's processes that are designed in order to give effect to the delegation of authority. In other words, they defined the steps, that must be followed in order to do an investment, as an example. Their own processes are owned by management, policies like delegation authority and others are owned by the board.
Mr. Commissioner, can we have a 10-minute convenience break?
Yes, we will adjourn for 10 minutes.
Thank you, Commissioner. It's good. It's good.
If you need longer, tell me.
No, 10 minutes is good.
are deceiving. A very small percentage a 6 billion rand, and as we heard from the GEPF actuary, a 6 billion rand, when he does an assessment, is a rounding number. 6 billion rand's a lot of money. So it is important to recognize that the percentage tells you one story, the money itself, the value of the money tells you a second one, and they should not be confused. These are serious monies. I think the second question for me around this issue is that the identity or the identification of the transactions have been that which have been highlighted in different aspects of concern. There are many issues that have come up and many more transactions that have come to the attention of the investigating team. So these are only a very small number that are in your statement or being dealt with through your statement. And given the terms of reference that we have and the time availability, we have to look at both of those in what we're looking at. So the important question for me around this is not what percentage of this is in terms of the total, is that the issues that are being raised, how applicable are they and how extensive are they in the organization. And I just think it's recognizing that percentage-wise it might be small, but a very small percentage of 2 trillion is actually a lot of money.
It's a fair comment. That's what it is. I mean, we can't run away from that. That is what it is. And it's dictated to by various things, the investable universe, the nature of the benchmark that we need to track, diversification benefits that come out of that has worked for the fund. You can have, the mistakes will be made, even the best manager will make mistakes. The issue is how do they respond to those mistakes that they are never repeated again. But there will be new mistakes as we go along. It's in the nature of the business. Yes. I thought I should point that one out. Can I proceed, Commissioner? We are
Yes,
now
yes, please.
to SACO and at Ascendis. 341. The PIC concluded 2 transactions, namely Tosako around 2015 and Ascendis around June 2016. They were all introduced to the PIC around end of May 2015. The PIC funded the purchase of shares by BE companies in both these 2 deals. The media raised concern about some of the beneficiaries in the deal, in particular Mr. Lawrence Mulauzi, who was involved in both deals. However, both these deals followed the official PIC deal appraisal process to the letter. We'll start with Tosako.
Just to check something, Mr. Mulauzi, there are other transactions that he did with the PIC, I think. Would that be Bounty Brands and the others? The property transaction and the others? Besides these 2 transactions, I think there are 3 more transactions.
I'm not aware of the others. The ones that I know is Tosako and Ascendis so far, that I know of, where he was the active promoter.
Okay.
I don't know the other ones.
Bounty
Bounty Brands is part of the Ascendis.
Oh, I see.
Yeah, it's got in the Kifolilo, there's Bounty Brands in there as well.
And there's
and
nothing.
even Tosako, there's a retail. I think retail has not been done.
Yes.
For some reason.
And there's no property transactions that you did with him?
Not as far as I know. What I can recall is that there was a transaction involving student accommodation somewhere in Venda, but the Department of Higher Education, I think, cancelled that project.
Okay.
They wrote to us to say they had issues with the university, so that thing could not proceed.
Okay. So this would be the only 2 transactions that the
So
PIC
far.
has.
Yeah, so far.
Okay.
Evidence has
Sorry,
been...
just in that, if at the outset when we're dealing with these, if you could just give us the amount of money involved. So for instance, the Tosako deal, I think it was 1.8 billion. It would just be useful when we're talking about it to know what the exposure actually is.
Okay.
If you do have that, if not, perhaps the team can just assist so that we can just say, because you have it to hand, and where I have been able to make notes, I've done that as well, but I think it's best coming from you to say this is the deal and this is the size of the deal.
Okay, Commissioner, I think I will have a challenge with that.
But perhaps our team can help you as well. So
Yeah,
that
in the sense that I had prepared my statement on the basis that my colleagues would have provided the technical aspects of most of the deals.
I accept that.
And I was dealing more with mandate fee
Sure.
and any other issues around it.
I accept that, but in the process, it's just helpful to, when we're having these discussions, to know the size of the investment that we're talking about. So
fully
it can come from any party. It's just helpful to have the size of the investment as we're talking about it.
I will make
Commissioner,
every attempt to do.
the TOSACO is 1.8 billion.
Is that fine? Thank Commissioner. Evidence has been laid on this transaction by Mr. Tsepo Rapudi and Mr. Benedict Moalo from the PIC, Mr. Lawrence Mulauzi from Kilimanjaro Capital, Kilikep, and Mr. Sipom Selegu from Sakunoto to this commission. I met with Mr. Mulauzi in early May 2015 when he introduced the TOSACO opportunity. I had not met him before. There was just a cold meeting request, and the office accepted, and he then presented this TOSACO opportunity. I gave him a rundown of the processes, and most importantly, that he should provide the PIC with an information memorandum for this opportunity. I received the TOSACO information pack on the 22nd of May 2015 from him. I passed this on to Executive Head of Isibaya, Mr. Roy Raja, for review and guidance.
Can we go back to this question of payment that I think was made to Mr. Magula that we discussed previously? Because there's no evidence to this, but what has been brought to attention is that Mr. Magula helped Mr. Malawutsi structure the TOSACO deal and spent time with him prior to this. Are you aware of that at all? And that the payment that was subsequent to the deal was for the services rendered in preparing this? Are you aware of that at all? Are you aware of any of those allegations? And because obviously that would compromise the whole question of preparing and then being head of risk to propose the deal go ahead. Are you aware of any of those allegations?
Yeah, Commissioner, I wasn't aware that Mr. Magula was already involved or was involved in the deal before the PIC was provided with an information memorandum. Or, of course, Mr. Magula would have been involved as a risk person to process the transaction from the risk side. But
Yeah, that's
I was
a different
not aware.
question.
Yeah, I was not aware of this relationship that he has with Mr. Mulauzi at that point.
So the information that Mr. Magula spent time at Mr. Malawutsi's house helping him prepare, you were not aware of?
I wasn't aware of that. I only became aware through the wife of Mr. Mulauzi long after the transaction was done, or after the transaction was done, that there was this relationship.
So that was the improper relationship you referred to
I was talking
earlier.
about, yes.
So, but at that, when we were talking about it, you didn't indicate that you were aware that Mr. Magula actually spent time with Mr. Malawutsi preparing for this deal. We don't know if it was for other deals as well, but you can confirm that Mr. Malawutsi's wife had advised you that Mr. Magula was assisting Mr. Malawutsi. Is that correct?
Yes, yes.
Okay.
The nature of the assistant, I don't know.
Sure, but he was spending time at the
But there
house.
was that relationship.
And that
which
was prior to these deals being approved?
No,
and
it was
Mr.
after. It
After?
was after. Yes, it was.
Not before?
Yes, it was after. It must have been months after the deals were concluded.
That's when you heard about it?
Yes, that's when I heard about it.
Yeah, but
Through Ms. Mulaudzi,
Yeah.
I did, I think, highlight to the commission that she called me whilst I
Yes.
was in the United States requesting me to intervene in his
Sure. In their marital
difficult
problems.
marital issue.
No, I recall that. I'm just trying to clarify whether you only heard about Mr. Magula's interactions with Mr. Malaudzi at that time, but you were not aware that Mr. Magula was interacting with Mr. Malaudzi prior to the Tosako deal.
I wasn't aware.
But you are now aware that that happened prior to the deal.
In fact, this part I hear now from the commission
Okay.
that there was that sort of interaction.
Can we ask you, Advocate Libba, to try to follow up with Mr. Magula and get a clarity on what he has to say about this? Because in his evidence before the committee, that did not come up at all.
Yes, we are at the moment all still in consultation with Mr. Magula, and we will follow that up.
And then just in relation to Mr. Malaudzi, which you indicate here that you've met him for the first time in May, did he just introduce himself, or did it come through any other party? Or was there something through the question, I mean, because we also had this question arising of Nedbank, a Nedbank employee assisting Mr. Malaudzi. Are you aware, or did he come through himself? Because obviously Nedbank was part of that original deal, as you'll come to in the technical, but are you aware of anyone else, or who introduced you to Mr. Malaudzi? Did he come of his own volition?
He came on his own volition, Commissioner. I had not met him before, and it's not unusual.
Sure.
I do meet, people that I've not met before. How they got my contacts, it's almost public, especially my work telephone, my work telephone.
No, that's given. I mean, that's, you're going to get all of those people in.
Yes.
But it comes back to my previous questions, is that when you meet somebody like this, and using this as a particular example, when Mr. Malaudzi, and there was a lot of questions around that have come both from Mr. Msaleko and Mr. Malaudzi and yourselves in these transactions. In that first meeting, I'm assuming then, given that it was the first meeting and a proposal, that there was a formal record of that meeting that you can refer to?
No, there was no formal record. It's only the meeting date.
And it was between the two of you on your own?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
I think I must highlight again that most of the initial meetings that we have, it's just information purposes to say, I'm here, I would like to do a transaction or whatever. How can the PIC help? And we explain to them the processes. And the real key document or key engagement is when there is an information memorandum on the table from which the team can work from. That's been the process. But we take the Commission's advice into the future that maybe we could do things a little bit better. Or whoever is going to take over will understand, take heed of this advice. 334, if I may proceed. Mr. Raja and his team dealt with all negotiations and preparations on document interaction on this transaction. As this transaction was to be funded through debt, it should have been processed by a team led by Mr. Benedict Mungalo, a fund principal responsible for unlisted debt, but I think it landed with Mr. Roy Raja due to some miscommunication internally. The deal was funded by a GPF loan for acquisition of Tosako, and UIF loan for Tosako retail due to the high job creation potential. Hence the difference, you saw the difference in the pricing of the debt. The other one recognizes social returns, so the premium is slightly lower than the other one that only chases investment returns.
Mr. Malaudzi, in his evidence, said that that second leg, the question of rolling out the service stations and creating those entrepreneurial opportunities, did not materialize and had not materialized at the time he came. due to some of the issues around the structure and organization and partnerships and understanding of what needed to be done. How much weight in your decision to support this from the UIF as well was for that second leg of the rollout of the fuel stations?
Commissioner, my understanding is that the retail component was approved as well. And it was just
all
a
approved,
matter.
it just
Yes.
hasn't been implemented due to other issues.
I'm not sure what those issues were. It might be the media raising issues around the transaction itself. From where PIC was positioned, we had approved, and all we needed was a plan of a rollout, and therefore a request for disbursement so this thing can, the project can be rolled out.
Given that it was an important component of the TOSACO deal, would your post-approval team not follow up to say, well, this was part of the agreement, there's funding available for this, what's happening? Because that would have, I assume, been part of the implementation requirement to look at both performance and compliance with what the funding was required for. Are you aware that there was any follow-up to say, how has this implementation gone?
I am not aware. I'm sure the PMV should be in a better position to explain what happened. But my understanding is that they would have been waiting for TOSACO Retail on the other side to tell them that we're now ready, we need a disbursement, and that way it will kick in internal processes of checking whether everything that is being said is been put in place, is ready, so disbursement can happen. So I speak under correction. I believe that the team must have been waiting for a request for disbursement, and that never came. My understanding is that Kilicap was a newly formed company that was put together to pursue the TOSACO opportunity. Dr. Kinesh Patha, who held a small position in TOSACO, was also a director of a newly formed Kilicap. I have no doubt that his knowledge was instrumental in developing a plan to exploit this opportunity.
Can we just stay with Dr. Patha for a minute? He's from Kifolile Health,
Yes,
which is also funded by the PIC.
yes.
I think it's 1.8 billion
Yes.
into that entity. In terms of your role as CIO, CEO, and then combined, how do you look at cumulative risk or multiple exposure? If you've got, I'm using this as one example, here's Dr. Patha in TOSACO, there's Dr. Patha in Kilofile. If you looked at the other transactions coming, there's multiple investments. This one itself, TOSACO and Ascendus at the same time with somebody that you don't really know, and then you go on with other investments with Mr. Malawudzi or Mr. Msaleko in relation to that. So what mechanisms do you put in place to say what is our total risk exposure either to this individual or to this group?
Commissioner, let me first say that I'm the CEO and I'm assisted by other executive heads responsible for different areas. The issue, I think there is this impression created that I'm everything at the PIC. I'm the CIO, I'm the risk, I'm everything.
Don't go down that track, Dr. Matjila. I'm asking you specifically whether all the support is there, all the mechanisms are there. That's fine. What I'm asking as the PIC, and the CEO is the head of the PIC, what measures do you have in place for cumulative risk about an individual or about the companies, because they come under different names? So that when I look at the funding, I find it in different places because it's not one thing that says, here is MMI or here is Kilicap. It comes in different places. So when you are approving a deal, do you look at it only as that deal, or do you look at it as the deal plus all other exposure, both to the individual that may be on different areas or to the company? That's what I'm trying to understand. What is
Yes.
the cumulative risk exposure and how you understand that risk?
It's part of the risk report. They will guide on the exposure to any asset, cumulative exposure to any asset. So in this instance, we did the first one, Tosako, followed by Ascendis, and the guidance that we got from risk was that the exposure is still acceptable.
Okay, so
So-
it
so
would
there
form
is-
part of the report that when you
There
take
is-
that decision, you
there
would
is
have the
report.
cumulative risk, the full exposure, what this new deal is adding to that exposure, and whether there are common linkages around individuals. That would form part of the information that's provided to you to take the decision.
Yes,
And
Commissioner.
then you weigh up whether in actual fact that is an overexposure to an individual or that there is an overexposure to a group.
A group, yes, yes, Commissioner. Thank you. As Kilikap had no experience of putting together an investment information memorandum, the PIC advised them to appoint an advisor. Kilikap asked the PIC for a recommendation as they had no list of such service providers. The PIC duly recommended BNP Capital. I think this was discussed. And it's very important to highlight to the Commission that this is performed by the deal team, not at arm's length from the office of the CEO.
But in terms of advisors and the use of advisors who play a key role, it's going to come up a number of times in our discussions going forward. Do you have a panel of advisors who can be selected from, giving their different skills? And in that recommendation or, let's use the word panel of, or resource database of advisors, how many of those advisory companies or individuals were former PIC employees?
Commissioner, I don't have the list with me. The list is handled by the transaction team and the operations team. They have a database which they refresh on a 3-yearly basis. And there are instances when they add a service provider on the basis of special skills. If they are not, there's no service provider that has got those special skills in the database. But the whole maintenance and appointment is done by a specialist team that deals with procurement.
But they usually draw from the database.
They usually draw from the
And therefore,
database.
I think we have requested this before and it's in the pipeline to us, is what is that database and how many of those people are former PIC employees? And in essence, how many deals do they have? Sorry, just... absolutely huge.
They are huge, but as far as I know, that's standard practice. You know, a bank will charge the same. The advisory bank in the bank will charge the same.
I
And most of
understand,
the
but you're
time-
the
and most of
PIC.
time-
You're the
and most-
PIC.
Yeah, most of the time, I found they do get discount. They do negotiate discounts for the fees that they pay. You know, I mean, someone may argue that, but that percentage that discount is not enough. You know,
I
but-
think the question really should be looked at again because I'm not talking about what banks do, I'm talking about what the PIC does with safeguarding its client base and its returns. These are huge sums and you would have the weight to say, look, above a certain level we don't go. Obviously it would relate to each deal and the size and the complexity of the deals, but I'm rather struck by the size of a few months' work and you get 100 million rand.
Commissioner, it's a difficult one. you may say, I'm going to tighten on the fees, compromise, and I'm not sure if you're not necessarily going to run into problems of the quality of the service. It
That may well be a factor, but I think the fees are very big.
I accept that. I accept that the fees are big, but the fact of the matter is that you need to try and negotiate a discount from the best as far as possible. Otherwise, if you compromise, you may end up with bad advice.
I accept that risk, but I think that there is room for some work here.
I agree wholeheartedly with that. Maybe if the PIC is able to create its own strong advisory, it can assist as well to ensure that most of the work, as far as possible, is done in-house.
But that would be for the PIC, not for the client, not for the counterparty. The counterparty, I mean, the question becomes, you recommend, the potential again for conflict is why one's raising this. You have a database that works with the PIC, a client comes, does not have the requisite skill, you recommend an advisor from your database. Some of those people are clearly former PIC expertise who've set up their company precisely to do that. And there's a potential conflict, which is why I'm raising the issue, because it is a very lucrative part of the process. But there needs to be some looking at it, is because obviously you can't be both sides of the fence. You can't be a PIC advisory and an invest client advisor who wants to get good advice as well. I take it that it is, I mean, we can't necessarily take it further here. I'm just raising the question, and I would want the information of how many are former PIC members.
Before I answer that one, Commissioner, I think we saw the PIC as a training ground, if you will, as far as possible, creating new enterprises, black enterprises for that matter, and supporting them. And we believe it has to be at least across sectors, but with a lot of emphasis on financial sector, because that's where we are playing. And the asset management. We've done it very well with external managers. We could do better. And then you have advisory services, and we didn't see any reason why we are unable to create those out of employees that we believe should move out of the PIC and become bigger, rather than be constrained within the PIC, and give them support, whether it's legal or it's technical advice that we can get, and so on and so forth. But we are constantly under attack that, but you have a conflict, you can't have so-and-so being supported by the PIC because they used to work for the PIC, but in the private sector, it's common. Some of the big institutions that we see here were offspring of employees that went out and supported by an entity to go and set up shop and create this big thing, but it looks like PIC is prohibited from doing so, which I find, unfair, quite frankly.
I didn't say they're prohibited. I'm saying there needs to be clear and transparency about it. It's not prohibited. It just needs to be transparent.
I agree. I agree. As far as I can remember, in the companies that are in the PIC database would be BNP Capital, that we just spoke about here. There was noise around Kumovest, I think, 2 employees that left as well to set up advisory. And I don't think they got work from the PIC, but they have come with clients to the PIC to ask for financing. So they've done it the other way. We have not given them work to do, but they have solicited work for themselves and approached the PIC knowing how we work. Those are the 2 that I can remember quite well, Commissioner. I think it's in that lethal allegation about Kumovest and others, and we have refuted those allegations that we never gave them business from the PIC, as far as I know.
I just wanted to check if I heard you correctly saying that the PIC must ask for discounts. What I'm saying is that if there's a BEE advisory firm and is doing the same quality of work as Deloitte or Standard Bank, surely it needs to be paid market-related fees. I mean, why must the PIC pay that company a discounted rate? I mean, we know that transactions are 1% or 1.5%, so I'm just worried that if most of the BE firms, I mean, these guys are coming from big banks and big accounting firms, so if they can deliver the same quality of work, that's the key issue. If they can deliver the same quality of work, they must get the same kind of fees there.
That's exactly what I struggled with, because our list of advisors was made public in the media, leaked, and we were attacked for having appointed the small guys, and I just didn't understand why. If they're giving us good quality work, why can't they get work from the PIC? I've always struggled around that. But we are happy that we are doing it. We've done it, and we are not ashamed of what we have done. We've supported them, and I would ask the PIC to continue to support them.
Then the question of a discount then doesn't arise.
I hope it doesn't arise. I hope they are paid the fair market value as well.
Yes. Okay.
Just given that that question of a fair market rate has been raised now, I was going to raise it later, because it's the Sacom Noto deal, right, or Sacom Noto within the deal. The deal was 1.6 billion, but the fee was 5.8%, 100 million rand. That is not within the norm. The norm in the past 5 years has been a little under 2%.
Yeah.
So, that's the questions I'm raising, is that one's not asking to do people down or to say you're not going to get a fair rate, but this is a reflection of perhaps the opposite happening. So I would just say that this is an area that needs further looking at. It's not whether this is right or wrong at this moment in time. That's not the judgment, that we're not sitting here in judgment on that. It's trying to understand how a 100 million rand fee can be paid, which becomes 5.8% of the deal, 100 million rand, which is huge, given that the standard would be less than 2%. So that's what why the question gets raised. It's not to undercut them, it's to see that you're not overpaying as well.
No, I fully agree. This one was over the top, and reasons...
4% over the top.
Yes, 5% over the top. And I did raise concern.
4.5 even, yeah. It was high, it was quite high.
I did raise concern with my colleagues, and an explanation was given that following the merger of the two institutions, because they were working parallel, they incurred fees and they were expecting to be paid the 50%, the 2% or 2.5% fees. So once they merge, it doesn't mean that the liabilities due to them now are halved. It was the same, so that's why they ended up with this huge amount of fees.
Yeah, but 5.8%, let's say 6%, even if you had to split it, is 3%, which is a full percentage point plus above what would be the norm. So I'm raising it simply to say this is an area that needs to be considered again, given these kinds of anomalies that have been creeping in.
In fact, in my recommendation, I do talk about transaction fees, that they need to be looked at differently, because they seem to have to be driving a particular behavior that in the long term does not serve the portfolio, because if a transaction advisor walks away with huge fees and they're not concerned about the performance of the asset, it becomes problematic. So we need to find a way of tying them to the performance of the asset as well.
Precisely.
So this is something that...
Precisely. The question that you're not just coming to advise and get something done. It's a question of, does that actually stand the test of time, and have you done something in the interest of both the investor and the investee?
Yes. This issue of fees has been on the table at the PIC for a while now. I I think it needs to be attended to in the new...
Is it something that you have control of as the PIC?
I think the commissioner has said that we are a big player. We can, to some extent, set the standards as far as possible without harming our business. I think there should be a way. And if there's a payment, this is now my recommendation. It cannot be a full amount. It has to be linked to the performance of the asset. So someone that advises must also be tied to the performance of their advice. So that would be my recommendation. If it's 2%, it's fine. It's 2% is standard, whatever it is. But how do you get this 2%? How do you get to realize this 2%? It can't be on day one and then you are gone. You know, so that's the recommendation that I would put forward to the Commission.
So you'd say you get part of it and then we look at the performance of the asset?
Absolutely, and if it has to be in an escrow account sitting and waiting for the performance, that's fine, and you only realize. And if it has to be in an instrument or a share or whatever it is, so be it, as long as you are in there and ensuring that the asset also performs. So whoever advises must bring the best assets as well to help PIC construct a solid portfolio.
I just want to come again there. Globally, you would have Goldman Sachs advising a company, IPO or a transaction. They get their fees and leave, you know. And I'm not sure you're going to ask companies to advise and they have to pay salaries and bonuses, and you tell them that they must wait for 3 years, and the bulk of them are BE companies which are advising there. I'm not sure that this is global practice. You know, I'm not sure that is fair.
Maybe, Commissioner, let's apply our mind. We've put it on the table. I'm sure we just need to think of the best way of doing it. Maybe we become pioneers in the work around how we deal with fees.
Yeah, and look, we can talk about them, but I'm sure you know that Standard Bank advises you, you pay them the 100 million and they go. You know, so if you're gonna come with conditions, they'll take that transaction somewhere else. You know, so we can talk about it, but that's not global practice. You pay the investment bank and they leave.
I think all we're saying is that those are matters to be considered. It's something that
on the table.
Can be considered.
Yes, Commissioner. It's a thought.
I just want to follow up on that 5.6% fee. Was that seen in the deal discussions? Because it just says 50 million paid to this one and the other one. Was it ever discussed that the 5.8% is a high fee? Was there ever some concern within when this deal was done that, hey, you know what, like 100 million on this is quite a large fee?
Honestly, I only got to know about it after it was raised by the media. Because at the time, I think I was traveling on EcoBank's assignment. And when I got back, I found that there is this amount of money that has been paid, and I asked for explanation. And my colleague explained to me what had happened through this measure, and they had to pay capitalized, and most importantly agreed with the sponsors that any dividends that was due to them as a trickle dividend will be swept to service this liability. That's how it was managed.
And we sort of agreed that this was too high a fee. It shouldn't have been done. It shouldn't have been done.
Yes.
Okay.
We fully agree with that.
Sorry, and when you give us the list of all the transaction advisors, we would also get the names of the people. So BNP, we would know who's BNP and how often they're used and so on and so forth, just to get a feel of the role of the PIC in the advisory space.
Yes.
Thank you.
347, Commissioner, the PIC provided Kilikeb with a non-binding letter of expression of interest dated the 2nd June 2015. A copy of which is attached under and marked DD52, which they could use to make an unsolicited bid for Tosako. According to Mr. Malauzi's statement to this commission, Nedbank also issued Kilikeb with a similar letter on the 2nd of June 2015. My understanding is that Kilikeb was invited to participate in Project Atlas, this is a code name of Tosako, by virtue of having made an unsolicited bid to Kalulo for Tosako. Kalulo are the sellers for Tosako at the request of Tosako directors who were running the selection process alongside Nedbank. I only got to know about this later. There is a letter attached in their letter dated 11th of June to Kilikeb dealing with this unsolicited bid. I think it's on DD 53. The seller, Kalulo, informed Kilikeb that they were sticking to a competitive bidding process that was already running and thus rejected Kilikeb's request for exclusivity. Tosako expressed its preparedness to guarantee Kilikeb progression into phase 2 of the bidding process, thus ensuring that they become a preferred bidder. So it almost like come, hell or high water, you are in, it doesn't matter. This is how I understood this letter to me. At the time, I was completely unaware of Tosako letter dated 11 June 2015, and I was very surprised to learn of its existence in watching the evidence before this commission concerning this transaction. It appears that...
Just a question, maybe you might want to take us through the various letters that you normally signed. What is a letter of support? What is a non-binding offer letter? What is a binding offer? You know, if you could just take us through these letters and what they mean.
Okay. At high level,
Broadly,
broadly, if someone approaches the PIC for funding, and we then pass whatever information they give us, and it makes business sense to pursue, on advice of the team, we will then issue a soft letter of interest to say that this is something that we can look at. Yes. And then they can go back and do further work. Once we get to a stage of DD, then that's where we can issue an expression of interest to say now we are doing the deal because expenses are going to be incurred, so we need to tie in the sponsor that PIC is going to now spend money, and so there has to be an engagement letter that regulates that. They don't find a way of getting out of it. Of course, there will be escape clauses that allow the PIC to exit. Most of the time it's to the advantage of the PIC and not necessarily the promoter. So we somehow have mechanism of exiting in transactions. Now, in a situation where there is in fact, we have to also ensure that the sponsor gets exclusivity. It's on condition that they have exclusivity. If there's no exclusivity, that letter becomes null and void. If there is a competitive bidding process, we don't issue expressions, strong letters of expression of interest. We just issue a letter of support that we are interested, and it's normally not one company or a single person that we will provide. If they approach the PIC, there will be, if we are approached by numerous or number of them, we will provide them the same letter just to show that we are interested. The step that
on one transaction, so there will be a transaction and there could be 3 letters from the PIC saying these are we like this asset, and you know, you three people just go and get it.
We go and get it,
Yeah.
and if you get, whoever gets exclusivity, then we can engage in terms of, we can issue them a letter, a binding letter of expression of interest. Also with conditions, of course, because what we have seen in the past is that we would issue a letter of, a binding letter of expression of interest before a stage where a price is properly set. And that becomes disadvantageous for the PIC, because then the promoter can take any price, you know, and there is this thing called winner's curse most of the time in the bidding process. You know, whoever wins, you must know that there's a possibility that they have overpaid. They must have bid for a price that beats everyone else. And so we have to ensure that we don't get trapped into that kind of risk as well. You know, so the checks and balances that we will only issue a binding expression of interest subject to conditions around pricing and many others. Conditions.
So the final letter is the binding one.
The final letter will be the binding letter of expression of interest.
Yeah.
Also with escape clauses dealing with appropriate due diligence as well as pricing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Okay.
So, 350, it appears that on the strength of this guarantee that the PIC issued an engagement letter on the 1st of July to Kilikep, which was signed, from what I can see, by one Miss Memory Mshangaize, who was acting on behalf of Mr. Raja at the time, which engagement letter I did not see until much later after it had been issued. And a letter of support dated 30 June to Sagumnoto was signed by me. In fact, this was not the only letter that I signed. There's also a Lereko as well that was in the running. It therefore appears that Kilikep was pushed through the usual PIC investment processes by virtue of being guaranteed progression into phase 2 of the Tasoko bidding process, even though it was a newly formed company. I believe the lack of communication working in silos within the PIC resulted in 3 competing consortiums all having been promised support by the PIC, including non-binding letters of support. Mr. Mulawuzi was now hounding me for a binding letter of support, which I refused to give him in preference over other bidders. Fortunately, I did not have to make a call in this regard. On 30 July 2015, both Mr. Mseleku and Mr. Mulawuzi separately came to see me to negotiate binding letters of support. Whilst they were there, I introduced them to each other and left them alone to discuss matters where, after both voluntarily agreed to the measure of their respective companies.
Can we pause there a minute?
Yes.
Because there's a very different version to that by both Mr. Malodzi and by Mr. Mseleku. And perhaps we can look at that. We'll come back to the due diligence issues just now. Because your statement is that they came to a meeting. I wouldn't imagine that people just pitch. Both of them said you had arranged to see them.
Yes.
You had so they didn't just come and see. There was a formal arrangement for them to come and see them, and they didn't know that each of them would be there at the time. And I found it very. I'd really like to understand this from yourself, if I can find my note. I won't be a second, sorry. Mr. Mseleku said that after meeting with you, that you indicated that he was going to, that you had indicated to him that the PIC would only engage with the preferred bidder or an entity that would have exclusivity on the transaction. And that after our meeting, you were going to meet with Mr. Malawadzi of Kilikap to explain the same situation. Unbeknown to me, Dr. Matjila had scheduled to meet us both on the same day, but at different times, in order to address the same issues, and Mr. Malawadzi had come to follow up on his funding application. And you said that Mr. Malawadzi had been given the same response. Following my unsuccessful, this is now Mr. Msoleko, following my unsuccessful meeting with Dr. Malawadzi to try and secure a binding offer for funding from the PIC, I proceeded to follow Dr. Matjila to the boardroom where Mr. Malawadzi was. Dr. Matjila introduced us to each other as a courtesy and told Malawadzi in front of me what he had told us. Now, how common is it if I've met with you and you're going to meet someone else? I can follow you into that meeting. How would that happen? Because we asked if he accompanied you, and he said no. He said he followed you. And when you got there, you simply allowed him in and then said the two must talk to each other. There were no formal minutes taken. It was an informal meeting. And you then sat together and agreed, and then went back to, they met and said, we have to talk to each other. We have to sort this out. They're going to deal with one of us only. It was a shotgun wedding, and they therefore came back to you, if I recall from the evidence, the same day, to come and say to you, we've agreed to work together. How common is it that somebody can follow you into a meeting with somebody else?
Well, maybe it's uncommon, but the most important thing, Commissioner, here is that I need to be transparent to both of them. I didn't want to create doubt that I'm giving someone a different letter to the other, because they were all there to get a binding letter of expression of interest. And I had to tell them both that we are not able to issue you with a letter, a binding letter of expression of interest.
I understand that.
That was the message that I needed to communicate to both of them. Now, the fact that Mr. Mselegu did not believe that I'm going to tell Mr. Mlaudzi the same, the same decision, that they're not going to get a binding letter of expression of interest. It's another matter. I mean, in his curiosity, he wanted to hear me say to Mr. Mlaudzi, I'm not going to give you a binding letter of expression of interest.
But then you have to accept that it was a shotgun wedding, because you put the two of them together in the room, told them, I'm not giving you a binding letter. You may not have said to them, I expect you to join forces, but you made it absolutely clear to him. But you also allowed somebody just to follow you into another meeting. I mean, I'm astonished.
Well, what is important here is what has happened and what would be preferable to the PIC. Is it a combined entity with history, or two entities fighting for the same thing and losing? Because at that point, they were the only two that are serious about getting funding from the PIC.
No,
one has no history, and as Mr. Mlaudzi said, they formed this company somewhere in Cape Town. I was uncomfortable that a company that has no history is trying to get 1.8 billion from the PIC, a startup for that matter. Mr. Mselegu's one had history, and PIC funding a broader entity is even better than one entity. So that they merged, in my view, was good for the PIC, and it was good for them. That's the position that I held at that time, and I still hold now.
I accept that. It's the question of how that occurred that became, because both of them gave very different stories about it, but that was the way you created this arrangement. In that circumstance, let's go back to the due diligence, because Mr. Malawadzi says that he asked whether, let me just come back to that point. He asked whether the there had been a due diligence that, let me see, Mr. Maloti inquired from Dr. Matjila as to whether Sakomnoto had been through the same due diligence process as Kilicap, but there was no response forthcoming. Mr. Msuleku says that there was no deal for the same due diligence because they were not a new client, and therefore there wasn't the due diligence because it had been done on previous transactions. And the question then, of course, comes back to this 100 million rand, that is advisory fees and your due process around due diligence. I just want to see clearly what he says here on the due diligence question. But he does say that it was not because of, he had full due diligence previously. And then it comes back to the cumulative investment, having put these two together with Tosako, because the total exposure in relation to, and obviously it's varied because there's different components within the consortiums for each one, but your interaction with Sakomnoto would be through EcoBank, where there's investment in EcoBank and he was involved, Zambezi Platts, which is 2 billion, EcoBank is $250 million, Tosako is 1.7 billion rand, Sakomnoto Properties 543 million. When you do a due diligence, wouldn't that due diligence have been required to look at the cumulative Sakomnoto exposure, adding the 1.7 billion from Tosako?
I would assume that my team would have done that. I don't get involved in due diligence. The team does that and advise me accordingly. Now, I haven't seen the report, but I was told by the team that they've done all the work necessary to recommend this transaction for approval.
Yeah, but Mr.
In addition to that, if I may, Commissioner, are we talking about the due diligence on Tosako, the target asset? There's a due diligence that needs to be done on, and both of them need to do that. And PIC need to also do their own due diligence on the same asset. And then the next one will be the promoters. So due diligence on Kilicap and any other underlying company that is exposed to this, as well as Sakomnoto on the other hand, and the cumulative exposures that you talk about. So I would expect all of that to be done by the PIC in full.
I would agree that all of that, I'm assuming, was done. The question of why it raises is because Mr. Malodzi says, and I'm not talking about the due diligence on Tosako, it's the question that Mr. Malodzi says there was a serious due diligence on him, Kilicap, which is correct, it's a new company, you don't know it, and you do a due diligence, and he asked whether the same due diligence was done on Sakomnoto. And Mr. Leku's response was, at the time of the negotiations on Tosako transaction, Sakomnoto was already a PIC client through previous transactions, which took place around 2010-2011. And therefore, you had files and files on Sakomnoto, and the information was the same as when they did the confirmatory due diligence. But he refers to a due diligence starting in 2010-2011, which would be different from what I'm asking here, a cumulative due diligence, Sakomnoto, the exposure to Sakomnoto of all of these entities and now into Tosako. And it's not clear from Mr. Msaleku's response, it was unclear that there was that due diligence because he said we were already a client and the due diligence had been done. That's not the same question.
Yeah. I think, Chair, I will check with the team, but I would expect them to have done a due diligence. If it's an existing client, there's a monitoring report that goes on a quarterly basis because it's unlisted. And my understanding is that indeed, Sakomnoto has an exposure in the PIC, I think it's in real estate, and I can't remember the other one. The EcoBank one didn't work out because EcoBank share price went nowhere and the option that they had expired out of the money. They negotiated a repricing which the board didn't agree to, and so they lost the premium. So technically at that time, they only had Sagunmoto properties.
It's 543 million.
Yes, as an exposure.
And Zambezi Platts?
And Zambezi Plaza as well,
Because that was a 2 billion investment.
which is a completely different instrument in the sense that it's a listed instrument that was done. We invested in this pref share listed instrument. I think it was alongside Coronation, and it's done well. This instrument has done well, and then Northam, I think it's Northam on the back of that issued, yeah,
Northern Platts.
yeah, issued shares to be including Sakumnoto. So we haven't funded Sakumnoto directly in that transaction. But that analysis would have been carried out by the risk team as part of their due diligence, risk due diligence.
Thank you.
Just to follow up here, on that particular day when the gentlemen were there, what was your thinking? I mean, you got two bidders who have sort of gone through the next phase, and you need to issue a binding letter. And one is a new company, the other is a sort of an established company. I mean, what were you thinking? What were you trying to say? What were you thinking that finally I'll give to one or two, or were you thinking maybe Sakumnoto will get this and stop Mr. Mulaudzi from hounding you?
Look,
what was your thinking?
Yeah, look, I mean, it would have been,
around the binding
I
letter?
remember it was a hard one. I mean, there was, you know, I couldn't choose between the two of them, quite frankly, you know, at that time. And so the exploring possibility of a merger would have been the best solution for me at that point. And I mentioned here that I didn't have to make a call because they eventually agreed to merge their entity, which would have been better for the PIC to fund a broader based grouping than just one.
And you didn't force Kilikep to merge because Mr. Mulaudzi said, no, doctor, don't force me to merge with these guys, you know. But this company is new, you know.
I guess the decision would have been easier for me to say we're not issuing a letter of expression of interest, binding letter of expression of interest to any. That was the message. We're not issuing a binding letter of expression to any.
And why couldn't you choose between these two companies?
It would have been hard. You choose one, you get accused of this, you choose the other, it's the same. So it's...
Okay. So the best thing was for them to merge.
Catch a falling knife.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Okay.
Sorry, Doc. I'd like to know, did you suggest to any one of them about the merger, possible merger between them?
Commissioner, I never mentioned it, but in my mind it was there.
I've got a difficulty with that because Mr. Mlaudzi says that you actually said to him that if they don't merge, then nothing's going to happen.
No, that's not true, Commissioner. That's not true. I never told him that nothing is going to happen. I remember quite, my words to Mr. Mlaudzi was, we can't issue you alone an expression of interest. The same message to Sakumnoto, we can't give you a binding letter of expression of interest because there's another company that's also competing. How do we choose?
So it came out of themselves. Because you see, I've got a difficulty also with Mr. Mseleko walking down the passage, following you, because I think he said he followed you. Going down there and then you leaving them without any indication that, look, it would be better if the two of you were to merge. And I'm not suggesting that that was wrong. I'm just looking at the evidence and looking at the probabilities of you having suggested that to them.
I think, Commissioner, I can only speak for myself. You know, they obviously said what they said, but my message to them was that I can't issue, they were there to be told that I can't issue a letter, a binding letter of expression of interest to any of them.
Why did you arrange a meeting with one today and the other one tomorrow?
If I had a choice, I would have said, come at the same time so I can tell you this story together.
No,
So
they came almost the same time. because
absolutely.
They were there together.
Absolutely.
I'm saying, why couldn't you say to one of them, I'm inviting you to a meeting today, and to the other one, can I invite you to a meeting tomorrow, so that they don't meet?
All I'm saying is, probably what I would have done is to bring them on the same day, in the same room at the same time. That would have dealt with any sort of suspicion. It would have been a much more elegant way of dealing with the matter. Because I was going to tell one message, that they are not going to get a letter of expression of interest.
Well, couldn't you have done that in 2 consecutive days?
I'm not sure if it would help in terms of suspicions that maybe I've given one a binding or I just needed to make them comfortable that I'm not treating them differently. I'm treating them the same.
How did you introduce them to each other?
Formally, you know, I think I met Mr. Msoleku in the morning and told him that I'm also meeting Mr. Mlauzi, who's here for the same thing. And after the meeting, Mr. Mlauzi came, as I said, and we introduced, I said, this is Mr. Mlauzi, he's here for the same thing. And then we went into the room, I spoke to Mr. Mlauzi, then he came, Mr. Mseleku came as well, as he explained. And then I left them to discuss. Yeah.
To discuss what?
I guess there are issues about the transaction, because they know that the issue here is that I'm not about to issue a letter of expression of interest.
I'm just wondering why Mr. Mlauzi says he was forced into this if you had not mentioned a merger between the two of them.
I don't know what the nature of the force is, Commissioner. He could have simply refused.
You really wanted the deal, you wanted it. You wanted it, but in any event, that's your evidence. I'm just looking at it on the basis that the evidence is contradictory, yours and his, and I'm looking at the probabilities. What really are the probabilities here? Are the probabilities that it was coincidental for them to raise the question of a merger, or is it more probable that it would have been suggested to them it would be better for you to merge, as he suggests? By the way, it appears from your evidence that you didn't have company, you were alone when you spoke to each one of them.
Yes, Commissioner.
Yes. Thank you.
But if I just to come there too, is that that's Mseleku said that he was very curious to see who is the next bidder, and when you left the office, he followed you because he was curious. Yes, and I think, did you say, well, if he follows me, I actually want these people to match. If he follows me, he sees the person, maybe they might know each other and talk. Was there something in there maybe? Sort of when you left him to follow you because he was curious?
Yes, curious to meet Mr. Mlauzi.
Yeah, he was curious to... Yeah.
I don't think your evidence is that you left him to follow you. That's not your evidence. Or is it?
He followed me.
Yes, he followed you.
He followed me.
That's what that's what he testified to.
That's right.
But you did not say to him, you must follow me.
No.
So you didn't leave him to follow you.
No.
Okay.
And so when he followed you, you just said, okay, he's following me, maybe he'll see the person, or what? I mean, were you thinking along those lines, saying, okay, he's following me, maybe he'll meet this person and they might know each other and start talking?
Yeah, I didn't have
Were
a
you
problem being followed, because then it created an opportunity for me to say, here is the message that I'm relaying to this person. We are not going, he's also not going to get a letter of expression of interest, binding letter of expression of interest.
Okay, thank you. I think we've traversed that sufficiently.
Mr. Commissioner, we've reached 12 o'clock. I don't know if you want to proceed further. I must just say, Mr. Commissioner, that I'm getting very worried. I think I should say anxious. I have 7 days left to present evidence before this commission ends the presentation of evidence. And we've covered 5 pages in 2.5 hours today. I'm not criticizing anybody. There are very valid and relevant questions asked, but at this pace, we're not going to finish.
Yeah, if necessary, some days we'll sit until 6 to cover that. But yes, no, we understand that very well, very well. We had hoped that we will get at least to Steinhoff today, but I see there are still a number of pages before we get to Steinhoff. But unfortunately, that's the nature of the beast, isn't it? The arrangement, Mr. Lubbe, is that Dr. Matjila will be here on Monday, because we will, in all probability, finish the other witness that you intend to call on Monday.
Yes, I have an indication from the GEPF is coming Monday morning, and I was in consultation with the council that in all probability they will not, depending on other circumstances, that they should finish in 2 hours. But I'm making provision that it will take to lunchtime. So the arrangement with Dr. Matjila and his team is that they will start at 2
Yes.
on Monday.
Yes, but I'm not going to say that we will adjourn until 2 on Monday, but rather we will adjourn until 10.
9:30, we can start at 9:30 or 10 on Monday. But I think I will also ask my learned friend and Dr. Matjila, and I'm sure they'll agree to that, that if we finish earlier perhaps, that I will notify them and perhaps we can start earlier.
Yes, and if usually when a court says we adjourn until 9 o'clock, it doesn't say the other accused or the other witness will be called at 2. It says 9 o'clock. Whether he's called at 2 or not is another matter. So let's then adjourn until 9:30 on Monday.
The 15th.
15th.
15th of
Yes.
July.
We'll then adjourn until 9:30 on Monday the 15th.
Thank you, Mr. Khan.